Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we are going to be talking a whole bunch about Nintendo Switch 2. Over the last day or so, there's been a lot of conversations going on about the Switch 2 specs. Apparently, Family Board has been tracking a lot of Nvidia shipping information that is giving us some really good insights into what the Switch 2 will actually be. A lot of people are going over this, suggesting it's very reliable. So we're going to be talking about it and discussing what this might actually mean for our experience on Switch 2. But beyond that, there's also been some reporting going around about the release timing for Switch 2, and I think it's actually very misleading, and so I would like to clarify on that as well. But before going forward, let me ask that if you do enjoy my content, to please subscribe and hit that notification bell. Now, focusing on this release timing clarification first, IGN put out an article, and here the headline on Twitter reads, Nintendo has signaled that its Switch successor console will not come out until April 2025 at the earliest. And let me just say right now, most people think this is misinformation, a really bad take, super misleading. When you go to the actual article, here they say, in an investor-focused question and answer session translated by GamesIndustry.biz, Nintendo President Shuntaro Furukawa confirmed that its forecast for the current financial year does not include sales of the console dubbed Switch 2. So there's something here that's a little misleading. So when we take a look at the actual question, this is the question here. If the expected hardware sales volume for the current fiscal year does not include the successor model of Nintendo Switch, the decline compared to the previous fiscal year will seem small. Do you think that even if you announce a successor model, the momentum of the Nintendo Switch business will not be affected? Furukawa then responds, the expected sales volume for the current fiscal year does not include the successor model of Nintendo Switch. So the context is missing here is that they are talking about expected hardware sales, which is why Nintendo clarifies. When you take a look at their actual forecast here, it says Nintendo Switch forecast 13.5 million units. And Nintendo has clarified that this number does not include Switch 2. That's what that was about. Now, where there is some debate is if their net sales forecast is including Switch 2 sales at the very end. It's not clear if it is or is not. Now, I will tell you this. If Nintendo wants to hit 13.5 million, many are thinking, myself included, that in order to hit that mark for Switch 1 sales in this current fiscal year ending March 2025, they will need to do price drops. But here's the interesting thing about price drops. Yes, if you do a price drop, more people will buy the console, but also people will buy the console for less money. In other words, you will make less money and have less net sales by doing so. So, I think you could argue that when you account for price drops and not making as much money, this forecast here still seems a bit odd, and this may still be including Switch 2 sales at the end. Now, something else that people have been pointing out is that back when Nintendo talked about the NX in April of 2016, the forecasting in terms of sales was also not super clear either, and yet the Nintendo Switch, what we eventually learned what the NX was, released March 2017. So we have context, we have precedent that suggests that what IGN and Game Industry Biz are suggesting is not really fully accurate and is kind of misleading. Now, to be clear, I am not promising or guaranteeing in any way that Switch 2 will release by the end of the fiscal year. What I am saying is that Nintendo has yet to confirm in any real way if it is or is not. So, jumping to that conclusion is just doom-mongering. It's just spreading negativity for no actual reason. We don't know, and it's fine to express doubt. There is no certainty is the main point here. But I will also say many rumors and reports have been suggesting March 2025 is the date. Even someone like Midori, who's considered to be a Pajoro-level leaker, is saying that March 2025 is a firm date for the release time of Switch 2. Hopefully that holds, hopefully it's true. But I remain optimistic that the console will be out before the end of this current fiscal year. But let's now get into the Switch 2 spec discussion, because that's very interesting. Lick on Family Board shared the information they saw from the shipment listings, and here's some of that info compiled together. The Switch 2 will have 12 gigabytes of RAM, two 6GB 7500 MT per second LPDDR5 modules. Now, it was questioned if it was LPDDR5X, and based off these speeds, apparently it kind of has to be. And what's a big deal about that is that actually, the difference between the two, the X part, suggests that it will offer improvements in terms of speed, power efficiency at higher performance levels, and lower latency. So this RAM is a lot better, basically. And what's great about this is that 12 gigabytes of RAM is more than what the Xbox Series S has, so that bodes pretty well. On top of that, though, there's also going to be apparently 255 gigabytes of UFS 3.1 internal storage. This is far faster than the internal storage on Switch, so this is a significant improvement, and there's also a lot more. So it's a lot better. Is it as much as some people were hoping for? No. Same thing with the RAM. No. People were hoping for 16 gigabytes of RAM and for 512 or a terabyte of internal storage, but this is still far better than what the Switch was, and it suggests very good things. On top of that, it also seems like the console and perhaps even the controllers will have a built-in microphone. What might this technology be for? We are uncertain. There has been mention of a speaker, so there could be some debate there. There could still be also a speaker, but if there's a microphone, perhaps similar to the PS5 controller, you don't even need necessarily a headset to have voice chat. And so that would be nice to see on Switch 2. I'll also make mention that if there is a speaker, I wouldn't mind some cool random sound effects sometimes if we want to use that feature. Say, for example, we're playing Metroid Prime 4 and they have an updated version of Prime 4 on Switch 2, and we get like a map update and they're like, hey, your map's been updated. Hearing that AI computer talk to Samus through the controller might be kind of a cool little experience. Now, what does this info sort of suggest about the Switch 2 overall? Well, we have this post here. Stealth was sharing information from Neozon619, and apparently they did a nice little breakdown. So what they're saying here, handheld will be right above PS4 before using DLSS. If you're unfamiliar with DLSS, that's deep learning super sampling. That is this technology that NVIDIA has been building upon and pioneering over the last few years that many people to Switch 2 will be utilizing. That basically uses AI to improve a number of things. Performance, resolution is the big one, perhaps even ray reconstruction, which is basically just ray tracing. And all these things will help Switch 2 games look and run vastly better. And so here they're suggesting that before even accounting for the DLSS that NVIDIA will likely have in Switch 2, in handheld mode we're looking at powers above PS4. That sounds pretty good in my opinion. But in dock, they say, between PS4 Pro and Xbox Series S, before DLSS with more modern hardware than the former. And that's something else to point out here. With newer hardware, it's a different architecture. You can't look at things, you see numbers on one console and numbers on a PC or a graphics card and say, oh, that's it, that's what it is, it's exactly the same or worse. Everything runs a bit differently, especially with something that's been catered for this particular environment that is the Switch 2. Moving on though, they also talk about RAM. It's slower than PS5 and Xbox Series X and S, but more capacity than S, should have 10.5 to 11 gigabytes of RAM available to games, which is pretty good. And as I pointed out, it's LPDDR5X, which is better than LPDDR5. So it's pretty good from what we're hearing here. They also talk about the storage. UFS 3.1 max speed should be a hair under Xbox Series X and S, 2.1 gigabytes per second versus 2.4 gigabytes per second. That's pretty good. That's in the ballpark. So I think that is pretty cool information, but NeonZon619 had more to say. So here they update and they say, another thing to add, we don't know the exact clock speeds of this chip, so while it probably won't be throttled down to hell since it's a custom chip, it's still something to consider. My estimates are assuming that the Switch 2 has similar clock speeds as Switch 1. Now, what's interesting about what's being said here is that we're also actually hearing, and I can't share this publicly because Family Boards restricts some things that they allow to be seen, but other people have already been talking about it publicly, so it's fair to discuss now because it's been mentioned elsewhere, is that apparently something else that's come out is that the dock may have a fan in it. Now, the reason why this would be a big deal is because when we look at how the Switch 1 works, no, the dock does not improve the graphical abilities of the Switch, but what it does is it connects it to an external power source, so it does not have to rely on the battery in the console, so they no longer have to worry about power consumption, draining the battery. So the Switch can go up to higher clock speeds and essentially run games better with better visuals when you're playing it on the TV. So in theory, the Switch 2, from everything we've heard, would follow a similar format. But what's extra interesting here is that if it does have a fan inside the dock, they can clock even higher. The Switch actually has even higher clock settings that we're not actually allowed to use. This is just something that developers can technically access, but it's not meant for consumers. The Switch gets very hot at this point. So the Switch 2 may actually have more wiggle room in terms of clock speeds, because when docked, yes, it'll be connected to an external power source, so they no longer have to limit clock speeds based off power consumption, but also, because of the fan, they can also raise it to higher speeds, not having to worry about heat as much. And that's going to bode well for Switch 2 performance when docked, playing games on TV. Games may look and run significantly better in this mode, and it's going to make docked mode feel more legitimate. A common point that was brought up throughout the early years of Switch is that handheld mode felt like a dream, but docked mode didn't seem to be as much of a substantial jump. But on Switch 2, if this fan in the dock is actually going to be a thing, then the jump may be substantial enough for people to think it's worthwhile. So in my opinion, this is all good stuff. When accounting for DLSS, it sounds like Switch 2 is going to be in the ballpark of Xbox Series S, which is what we've been predicting for a while, but also what we've been hoping for. Because if it hits this range, it suggests that we're going to have a lot of third-party games that are going to run pretty well on Switch 2. They're going to be worthwhile to play on this console. But moving beyond that, this amount of RAM and the speed at which it's running at will bode quite well for games on Switch 2. A lot of Nintendo games will be able to run pretty massive environments that will be quite detailed. This RAM would also help with higher resolutions and ray tracing through DLSS. Something I find interesting, the other day, Zoid Kirsch, who used to work at Retro Studios, a part of the original team that made Metroid Prime, they're currently retired, they talked about how they think, or they're going to guess, that Metroid Prime 4 will be a part of the headline launch for Switch 2. That's just their opinion, this is not a leak or anything like that. But something else they said is when Big Play John asked them anything you couldn't do in the original due to technical power, you'd like to see them try on a Switch 2. And here Zoid says, the biggest is the size of the area, rooms. We only had 24 megabytes of RAM on the GameCube, so it was difficult to do larger outdoor areas. I'd love to see huge vistas and maybe even areas you could fly Samus's gunship around in. And so there's nothing super groundbreaking here, I just thought it'd be interesting to point out in the context of considering more RAM means bigger, better, larger areas. And so just thinking about us maybe seeing Metroid Prime 4 having a better version on Switch 2, or say for example the next 3D Mario, maybe that game has large openish areas, even more detailed and bigger than what we saw in Bowser's Fury. The RAM is going to definitely benefit those environments significantly. And we're going to be looking at some pretty sprawling adventures on Switch 2 from Nintendo. That to me is very exciting. But also accounting for this improved speeds in terms of the internal storage, well, things are going to read and write faster, and that's definitely going to improve our experience as well. But then also with the additional internal storage, for me it's not that big of a deal because I usually just get a big micro SD card, but for those that don't, right out of the box you'll have more internal storage, and with something like 256, that'll be enough to install, say, something like Call of Duty on the console from the eShop, which we are expected to see throughout the Switch 2 era because of the Activision deal, where we're guaranteed to get Call of Duty for the next 10 years on Nintendo platforms. So it bodes well for us seeing third-party games like that when we see more internal storage. And then maybe having voice chat natively on the console, that would be pretty nice to see. Of course, that's just an assumption based off there being microphones, we'll see what they use it for. But it sounds pretty good, and I've already spoken my thoughts on the fan and the dock. If true, that would mean docked mode would be even better, which to me is all very exciting good news. But what do you make of all this information? Do you believe it? Is it exciting? Do you have different opinions? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.